Well, a serious look at the impact of climate change is taking place all across the city this week. Toronto Climate Week is going to bring together communities, ideas, and decision makers.
And one of those addressing the conference is former Toronto Mayor David Miller. We'd like to welcome David Miller to our show. Good morning, Mr. Miller. So I understand you're going to be You're going to be the keynote speaker at this event. Tell us more about the first ever Toronto Climate Week and what people can expect.
Well, first of all, there's over 100 events, which is pretty extraordinary for a first ever Climate Week. I think what people can expect is a really rich discussion about what we can actually do to address climate change. We've seen wildfires across this country this summer, for example. People know we need to do something. And the good news is there's a lot that is actually being done and a lot more we can do. And I think Toronto Climate Week will bring us all together to talk about those solutions and I think inspire our governments to do much, much more, or at least that's the hope.
On that government side, that's an interesting thing that you raised because, of course, the first thing that Mark Carney did when he became Prime Minister was effectively get rid of the consumer carbon tax. And the federal government really, quite frankly, hasn't spoken too much about climate change or the environment. How much does that worry or concern you? Because, I mean, even in national polling, it's fallen way down in terms of people's priorities right now.
It's a really fair point. And the polls are interesting because what they show is very clear, and this is true internationally as well, not just in Canada. The vast majority of people accept the science of climate change. They know there's something seriously wrong. They want something done. But the same people also think that there are far more people opposed to climate action than actually are opposed. So it's sort of a recipe for inaction. And I think one of the important things about having events like Toronto's Climate Week is to remind people that the vast majority of us do expect action and maybe send a little bit of a message to Ottawa that while we're building a Canadian economy that's much more independent from the U.S., we should be doing it in ways that are green. And the good news is we can. We can build green buildings. Canada's a world leader in that. Vancouver's building code, for example, is probably the world leader. We can do much more in electric transportation, including delivery trucks. We've got a pretty clean energy grid in parts of Canada. If we had a national electricity grid, we could do even better. So there's a lot that can be done. And my hope, and I think the hope of the organizers, is we can really put Toronto on the map as a place where climate action happens with this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like when it comes to climate change, a lot of people, like their health, kind of take it for granted until something goes wrong. And we've seen a lot of things kind of go wrong or signal to us that, hey, a devastating change is coming. But it seems like the younger generation is more focused on this than kind of people like us, middle-aged people. So when it comes to this kind of climate conference, or what kind of attendance are you expecting? I know 3,000 people are going to be there, a lot of tech companies as well. Where do you see innovation in this space for us?
I think that's a great question because, Canada, I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for the innovation we have in this country on climate matters and other areas of innovation. We're the world's 9th largest economy. And we sometimes look at ourselves thinking, well, if I do something successful here, can I sell it in the U.S.? I think we should be looking to the world. And, it's not part of Climate Week, but Export Development Canada is having a conference next week about tech innovation and how do we use Canadian innovations globally. And there are lots of Canadian companies that are flying below the radar that have real innovations that create jobs, that lower our impact on the planet. And that if we, helped find markets in Europe, in Asia in particular, in South America, they could really succeed. And, I hope that this week, in addition to all the great conversations about policy and the great examples of good things that are happening, including right here in Toronto, we do give a spur to those innovations because that's a quiet Canadian strength.
The interesting conundrum, of course, this brings up is, all those innovations and tech that you're talking about, Mr. Miller, costs money. And people are saying, oh, well, I'm not sure we can afford this right now. We've got to prioritize and, put our tax money elsewhere. However, there's a cost down the line if you don't do something now. How do you convince people of that and get people to understand that the money up front may be less than the money on the back end?
Well, first of all, it was a great session at Toronto Public Library on Friday about exactly that issue. How do you talk about climate change in a persuasive way? But you're quite right. Sometimes doing the right thing costs more up front. It's usually far cheaper. Like if you build a really good building, it's far cheaper to operate, and sometimes it might be more expensive to build. I would argue not always, but it's far cheaper to operate. So how do you encourage people to make that investment? Well, if you listen to people like Mayor Richard Ireland from Jasper and the unbelievable cost and impact of Jasper burning down last year because of wildfires, 30% of their buildings were disappeared, were burnt down. There's a massive cost to that. People know these problems are happening. And I think put the right way, people will come with you, particularly when you make the case that in the long run, we're far better off. It's far cheaper to do the right thing rather than making the problem worse.
All right, going to be an interesting week this week. That's former Toronto Mayor David Miller joining us to talk more about Toronto Environment Week. The Toronto Climate Week. Want to get that right. Mr. Miller, thanks for the time this morning.